Nightworkers. I'm OldDadGuy. I tell scary stories so you can question every sound in your house at 2 a.m. You're welcome. No turning back now. The cabin that wasn't on the map. I've got a habit of checking old topo maps against satellite images whenever I get a new ranger assignment. Most of the time, I'm looking for forgotten trails, old mining paths, or animal migration patterns. But sometimes I find something that shouldn't be there. This one was different. My posting had just moved to the Tug Fork Valley region near the West Virginia Kentucky border. Thick forest, rugged terrain, not a lot of oversight. While scanning for illegal hunting camps, I noticed a structure on satellite. Tiny, isolated, deep in a gorge off a tributary of Dismal Creek. It wasn't on any official map. I asked around. No one had a record of a homestead out that way. A couple of locals told me stories about the Gray Place and muttered something about deep timber folk, but they didn't elaborate. Mostly I was told to leave it be. Naturally, I didn't. I hiked out there the next morning, packed light, but brought backup GPS and a sat phone. The trail was tight, overgrown, like the forest was trying to cover its tracks. Every step deeper, the woods got quieter. The usual ambient noise, birds, bugs, wind, it all faded until the only sound was my own breath. The cabin came into view around 3 p.m. It was old. Black wood, slanted roof, no path, no driveway, just trees growing up around it. There were no power lines, no smoke, no sign of habitation. Still, it didn't feel abandoned. I knocked on the door. No answer. I checked the perimeter. Dusty windows, but clean panes. That's when I noticed something strange. There were no reflections in the glass. Not of the trees, not of me. Inside, I saw a movement. A shadow. Quick. Just out of view. I radioed in. Static. Tried the sat phone. Dead. Against protocol, I entered. The air inside was colder than it should have been. Cabin smelled like cedar, iron, and something faintly sweet. There were no lights, no furnishings, just a chair in the center and a mirror propped up against the wall. That mirror, it wasn't reflecting the cabin. It showed a different room. Same size, same shape, but brighter, newer. And someone was standing in it. Me. But not me. Same face, same uniform, but his eyes were wrong. Too wide, too dark. And he smiled at me like he'd been waiting a long time. I backed out of there fast and slammed the door. It didn't budge. The doorknob twisted on its own. I turned to the mirror, and the other version of me stepped forward, raised his hand. And I felt mine move involuntarily. I fought it, pushed back. The door finally gave, and I stumbled outside, gasping for air. When I looked back, the cabin was gone. Just trees. No trail, no foundation, like it had never been there. I bushwhacked it until dark and was picked up by a local road crew near Route 52. Dehydrated and limping. I'd been gone 2 days. They said I was found wandering along the shoulder, muttering something about the man in the mirror. Is that Michael Jackson? Meh. I never logged that report officially, but I check the satellite images every few weeks, and every so often, that cabin comes back. The men who live in the quarry. There's an old stone quarry in the southwestern portion of the forest, barely marked on maps, maybe a couple of miles from Old Parker's Ridge Fire Road. Locals don't go near it. Even the ATV kids steer clear. It's just not a place folks talk about. But every so often, we get a call. Lights at the quarry. Screams from the woods at night. Something walking around the ridge in the middle of the night. Real tall. Real slow. Last fall, 2 rock climbers vanished there. Good kids. College-aged, with enough gear to summit Everest. They'd posted selfies near the quarry's edge one afternoon, and by evening, they were gone. Their camp was found undisturbed, but their ropes had been cut. Not frayed, cut. Clean through, like with a blade. We brought in search dogs, choppers, heat vision. Nothing. I was assigned overnight watch with Ranger Donnelly. Older guy, Vietnam vet, kind who chain smokes and listens to AM radio while on duty. He said, "You know about the men, right?" I asked what he meant. "The ones who live in the quarry." He told me about a group of men, descendants of miners, outlaws, and squatters, who supposedly refused to leave the site back when the quarry shut down in the 1950s. Said they dug deep, deeper than was safe, and something down there changed them, twisted them. He said their skin lost color, their eyes adjusted to the dark, that they worshipped the stone. At the time, I figured Donnelly had smoked a little too much of something back in Nam. Until that night. We heard movement around 1:40 a.m. Not animals, feet. Bare feet slapping against stone. Then came the laughter. Hollow. Crooked. We crept toward the edge of the quarry with flashlights and rifles. The pit stretched wide below, silent and black like a drained snake. And then we saw them. 3 figures. Pale. Hairless. Thin. Like men made of wax. They moved together in perfect sync, walking in slow, strange patterns along the quarry floor. Donnelly whispered, "Don't let them see the light." I shut my flashlight off. Too late. They stopped. All 3 heads turned towards us at once. And then they began climbing. No ropes, no hesitation. Just scrambling up sheer rock walls with spider-like ease. We backed away fast. Donnelly fired a warning shot. That made them stop, but only for a moment. The sound had called more. Shapes emerged from crevices, from cracks in the stone. 6, maybe more. All pale, all moving in perfect rhythm. No speech, no breathing, just movement. We ran back to the truck and drove until sunrise. When we returned the next morning with backup, there was nothing. No prints, no damage, just the quarry, cold and dead as ever. Donnelly filed it as unverified suspicious activity. He retired 2 weeks later. I still get calls. Panicked campers who hear laughing at night, see strange figures watching from behind boulders. The quarry is off limits now, officially, due to landslide risk. But that's not why it's closed. I think those things were once men. I think they never left the quarry. I think they're still down there, in the dark. And I think they're waiting for us to come back. The Sky Caves of Devil's Backbone. I've been a ranger in the Appalachian Highlands of West Virginia for over a decade now. Spent more nights in a tent than in my own bed. I've seen it all. Meth labs in the brush, bears high on garbage. Even a guy once tried to baptize a squirrel in a stream. But nothing, not even the worst backcountry weirdness, prepared me for Devil's Backbone. It's a ridge in the north quadrant of the park, steep and narrow, with cliffs that jut out like vertebrae. Locals say the name comes from the old mountain men who tried to cross it back in the 1800s. Said they saw fire in the rocks, faces in the stone. Most wrote it off as their altitude sickness or isolation madness. Then came the Sky Caves. 3 years ago, hikers started reporting strange holes along the ridge wall. Perfect circles carved into the cliff face. Too symmetrical to be natural. One guy swore he saw a figure inside one. Said it ducked back like it didn't want to be seen. We sent out teams, found 2 of the caves, maybe 15 feet wide and 6 feet tall, perfectly round. No tool marks, no debris, just openings in the rock like they were melted through. They weren't on any geological survey or aerial scan prior to that year. I volunteered to investigate. Ranger Cleary came with me. A sharp woman, former geologist turned ranger after a divorce and a midlife crisis. She packed gear, lights, rope, and a thermal scope. We rappelled in on a clear Monday morning. The temperature dropped 20 degrees inside the cave's mouth. No wind, no animal sign, not even bat droppings. The air was sterile, dead. About 30 feet in, the tunnel curved upward. That's right, upward, like a natural spiral ramp. We climbed. Cleary scanned with a thermal and said there's something wrong. The scope's reading ambient temperature in a perfect sphere around us. No gradients. Half an hour in, we heard something. Not an echo, a voice. But it wasn't echoing. It was layered. Multiple voices at once. Like radio static from 20 different stations mashed together. I spun my light and saw movement up ahead. The walls of the tunnel shimmered. Like heat waves, but cooler. Cleary stopped. Do you smell that? I did. Ozone. Like after a lightning strike. We pushed forward, against our better judgment. The tunnel opened into a chamber that didn't make sense. Geometry skewed, angles that hurt the eyes. The walls pulsed faintly. And at the far end, a figure, 7 feet tall, lankier than any human should be. Eyes like obsidian marbles, skin the color of wet ash. It stood still, unmoving, watching. We didn't speak, just backed out, slowly, quietly. When we turned and fled, the air behind us shook, like thunder rolling in reverse. We ran so fast, we left our gear behind. The cave was gone the next day. I swear to you, it was gone, like it never existed. Cleary transferred 6 months later. Said she was done with mountains. She works admin now in Colorado. I stayed, but I don't go near Devil's Backbone. Every so often, we get new reports. Lights in the sky above the ridge, shapes moving in the rocks, radio malfunctions. One hiker said it best. It's like something's watching from behind the cliff face, like we're insects on a petri dish. I don't know what's in those caves or where they lead, but I do know this. Some caves don't go into the earth, they go out. The Thing in the Fog, Shenandoah National Park. They say the fog in the mountains carries whispers. Some call it the wind through the trees. Others, like me, know better. It started with disappearances, hikers, campers, even a pair of AT thru hikers who knew the trails like their own boots. They vanished near Doyle's River, last seen around twilight. That time when the fog rolls in so thick, it feels like the forest is trying to forget itself. We've had missing persons before, but something about these were different. No gear left behind, no signs of a struggle, no bodies, just cold ashes in a fire ring, and footprints that trailed off into the fog and never came back. My name's Jackson Hayes. I've been stationed at Shenandoah for over 12 years. I know this land. I respect it. But after last fall, I don't patrol alone past dusk anymore. It was October 17th when dispatch got the call. A solo hiker radioed in, panicked, said she saw people moving in the fog, but no one answered her calls. Then the line cut. I volunteered to check it out. By the time I reached the trailhead near Brown's Gap, the sun was low. The fog was already curling along the forest floor, thick as wool and just as quiet. I radioed in and started walking. 10 minutes in, I found her pack. It was lying open in the middle of the trail, half zipped. Inside was her journal. The last page read, "Voices. They sound like children, but they're wrong." I felt the cold before I saw the shapes. Fog rolled in like a wave, dense and fast. My flashlight beam hit something tall and still between the trees. I stepped forward. It moved. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't human either. I drew my sidearm, called out, but no answer came. Just a breathless silence. Then from the fog, a voice. childlike, too high, too smooth. Come play with us. I turned. A figure stood 20 feet away, pale, no eyes, just folds of a skin where a face should be. I blinked. It was gone. Then came the singing. Old, warbled, like a record playing backward. I ran. Something chased me. Not footsteps, something slower, like mist pulling itself forward. I reached the fire pit where the hikers had been last seen. The ashes were warm. There were bones in the coals. Not animal. I dropped a flare. The fog recoiled, and for 1 second I saw them. Dozens. Staring from the trees. Skin like wax. Mouths open and soundless screams. I got out. Barely. Since then, 3 more have gone missing. The locals talk about the Widow's Watch, an old Civil War legend. A woman who waited for her husband to return from battle until she vanished in the fog. They say she still walks the woods, calling to the lonely. But I think it's older than that. Something ancient lives in Shenandoah. It speaks through fog. It feeds on the lost. And it's still hungry. My name is Dale Timmons, and I've been a park ranger at Beaver Creek State Park in Ohio for the better part of 16 years. Beaver Creek isn't the biggest park, not by a long shot, but it's thick, dense with pine and oak, crisscrossed with trails that wind through shadowy hollows and along high ridges that overlook the winding Little Beaver Creek. There's a silence to this place, an old stillness that sits in around dusk. Most folks come here for camping or hiking, maybe a picnic at the Pioneer Village, but they don't stay late, and there's a reason for that. It was a Thursday in late September. The leaves had just started to turn, and the air had that kind of crisp bite that settles into your jacket when the sun goes down. I was out doing a routine patrol. Nothing fancy, just checking the trailheads were clear and the fire pits at the group sites had been put out properly. I was near the East Rim Trail when I got the call. "Ranger Timmons, you there?" came over the radio. It was Ben, one of the younger rangers working dispatch that night. I clicked the mic. "Go ahead." "Got a report from campers at Site 14. Said there's something circling their tents. Heavy footfalls, breathing sounds. No visuals yet, but they sound pretty spooked." I sighed and pulled the truck around toward Dogwood Trail. Site 14 sat a bit deeper than most of the others, backed up against an old stretch of forest that hadn't been logged in over a century. Big pines, no cell service. You learn to trust your gut out there. 10-4, I said. On my way. By the time I reached the site, the sun had dipped below the ridge, leaving just the blue shadow of twilight spilling over the treetops. The campers had a fire going, but it was low, more for comfort than light. I stepped out of my truck and immediately clocked their faces. 3 of them, 2 guys and a girl, probably early 20s. They were pale and wide-eyed, clustered close together like kids caught in a storm. "You're the ranger?" the girl asked. Her voice trembled. "Something's out there." The taller guy, wiry with flannel shirt wrapped around his waist, added, It was throwing stuff. Rocks, we think. Big ones. We heard knocking, like wood on wood. Like that Bigfoot thing? Normally, I'd chalk it up to nerves. A raccoon will make all kinds of racket if you catch it near the food. But these kids weren't drunk. And when I stepped over to check the perimeter of their camp, I froze. There were footprints. Bare. Massive. Sunken deep in the soft loam behind their tents. Loam? Loam. And I guess that's loam, but I don't know what the heck loam is. Anywho, a clear trail circling. Each step was spaced far apart. Too wide for a human, unless they were running with stilts and no shoes. And these weren't fresh from the rain. They were recent. I scanned the woods with my flashlight, the beam cutting through the brush. Nothing moved. Not a cricket, not a bird. That part chilled me the most. Even the frogs down by the creek were quiet. I returned to the campers. Look, probably just a bear. Might have stepped in the mud and left a print that looks bigger than it actually is. That said, I'll stick around for the night, just in case. I parked my truck at the edge of their site, and I settled in. I wasn't going to scare them with speculation, but I didn't sleep either. I kept that light bar ready, hand near my radio, eyes peeled on the tree line. And around 2:30 a.m., the forest exhaled. Something stepped between the trees. The noise didn't come from the direction of the fire pit or the trail. It came from the woods, just beyond the ring of tents, where the lantern light didn't reach. A low, deliberate crunch of leaves underfoot. One step, then another. I sat upright, reached for the spotlight mounted in the cab of my truck, and I flicked it on. The beam cut through the trees like a blade. Nothing. Just branches and night fog curling low to the ground. But I knew what I heard. I'd been in these woods too long to mistake wind for footsteps. I stepped out slowly, boots crunching on the gravel. My breath showed in the beam. I panned the light across the trees. Then I saw them. Two eyes, far apart, reflecting back yellowish in the light. They didn't blink, they just vanished. 1 second they were staring at me from behind a pine tree, and the next, they were gone. I walked toward where the eyes had been. Every instinct screamed at me not to, but I had to. It was my job. I wasn't going to let some kids get mauled by a bear or whatever the hell that was. That's when I found more prints. They weren't just big. They were fresh. You could see the outline of toes. The stride was impossibly long, nearly 4 feet between steps. And the ground was compressed as if whatever made them weighed several hundred pounds. The strangest part? No claw marks. These weren't bear prints, and they weren't human either. I called back over my shoulder. Stay by the fire. Don't move. Don't talk. The campers did as they were told, huddled close. One of the boys gripped a camp hatchet, like it would help. The girl was quietly crying. The forest was silent again. But now it felt like we were being watched. I backed up slowly, and returned to the fire. "I'll keep watch," I said. "You three try to get some rest." They didn't. Neither did I. Hours passed. The night dragged on. Then, just before 4 a.m., a blood-curdling scream tore through the trees. High-pitched. Human. I jumped up, light sweeping in every direction. One of the campers was missing. The girl was shrieking, and the other boy, Evan, I think his name was yelling that their friend Jason had stepped out to pee 10 minutes ago. I grabbed the radio, heart pounding. "Ben, this is Timmons. I've got a possible missing camper. Male, mid-20s, named Jason. Last seen near Site 14. Mobilize backup." But the radio just crackled. Dead signal. I had no choice. I grabbed my sidearm, my mag light, and set out toward the iron furnace ruins. It was the closest landmark in the direction Jason might have wandered. I didn't get far before I saw the first sign. A large, upright pine tree snapped in half at about 7 feet up. No cut, snapped. Clean. Fresh sap still oozing. Something was in these woods. Something strong. And it was hunting. The trail to the iron furnace felt wrong that night. I'd walked it 100 times before. Hell, probably in the dark at least 20. But this time, my skin crawled. The kind of crawl that starts at your spine and spreads, like your body knows something you haven't caught on to yet. Every few yards or so, I'd stop and listen. Nothing. Then a branch would snap in the distance, too heavy for a squirrel. Or I'd hear a low, rhythmic breathing, like something exhaling slow and deliberate. Jason's name caught in my throat. About a half-mile in, I saw something pale just off the trail, leaning against a tree. I ran. It was him. Jason. Shirtless. Covered in mud. His eyes were wide open, but didn't track me as I knelt beside him. "Jason," I shook him. "Can you hear me?" His lips moved barely. He whispered something I'll never forget. It talked. In my head. I blinked. What? Who talked? He shivered violently and looked over my shoulder. Said I wasn't supposed to see it. That's when I noticed the gashes on the tree behind him. Deep claw marks. 3 of them. Not human. Too high off the ground to be a bear. Something had marked this tree, like a warning. I got him up, half carried him back to camp. His legs buckled every few steps. The campers were crying with relief when we got back. They wrapped him in blankets, but he didn't say another word. I used the emergency sat beacon in the truck to call dispatch. The signal barely went through, but they got the message. We needed evac. The sun was just starting to rise when help arrived. Jason still hadn't spoken. While the medics checked him out, I took one of the other rangers, Denny, back to the tree. He stopped in his tracks when he saw the claw marks. "Another one?" he muttered. "That's the 3rd this year." I stared at him. "What the hell are you talking about?" Denny avoided my eyes. You're a senior here, right? You ever get briefed about the big ones? I shook my head slowly. Yeah, he said. They don't brief us anymore. Budget reasons or some crap. But ask any of the old timers. These woods aren't empty at night. Then he pointed out something I hadn't noticed before. On the other side of the tree, etched faintly into the bark, was a series of symbols. Not letters, not carvings, like someone had used a stone to draw long, looping shapes. They looked wrong, twisted somehow. I didn't sleep that day. Neither did Jason. They sedated him on the ride out, but he woke up screaming in the ER. I heard later he moved to Arizona, quit school, doesn't go outside after dark anymore. I believe him. After Jason was taken out, I stayed behind to debrief with a search crew. The other campers had been escorted to the ranger station, and Site 14 was being shut down indefinitely. Not for maintenance, not for storm damage, just closed. Too much wildlife activity, they told the public. Internally, they didn't even want to try to explain it. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next night, I came back alone. I know that's reckless, but I couldn't let it go. I needed answers. I retraced the route to the marked tree. I brought a thermal cam, a body cam, and a 12 gauge loaded with slugs. I didn't expect to need it, and I prayed I wouldn't. Around 1:15 a.m., I picked up movement on the thermal. Bipedal, 7 feet tall. Moving slow, not running. It stopped every few steps, listening. Maybe. It stayed just out of view, pacing along the slope near the creek. I turned on my body cam and whispered. Still tracking subject. Temperature spikes indicate live presence. Too large for human. Possibly upright bear. But I didn't believe it. Not anymore. It stopped, and then it did something that chilled me to the core. It knocked. 3 slow, rhythmic knocks. Wood on wood. Then it answered itself. 3 knocks from behind me. I spun around, light and shotgun raised. Nothing. That's when I realized I wasn't tracking one. There were 2. Maybe more. The knocks weren't for me. They were talking to each other. I backed away, 1 step at a time. The thermal went cold. Gone. I made it back to the truck by 2:30. Didn't speak. Didn't radio. I just sat there, heart hammering. The next morning, I filed a report. 2 days later, the report disappeared. When I asked about it, my supervisor, an old-timer named Hutch, closed the office door and sat me down. You want to make it to retirement, Timmons? He asked. I nodded slowly. Then listen carefully. This park has rules. We don't go near the furnace after dark. We don't camp past Dogwood Ridge. And when you hear knocking, you don't knock back. I didn't say anything. Look, he said, softening. You're not crazy. You saw what you saw. But this park's older than all of us. There are things out here that don't want to be found. They've been here longer than people. Let them be. Then he handed me a transfer form. Request a shift change. Stick to the lower trails. I took the form, but I never filled it out because I needed to know more. It's been 3 years since that night. I still patrol Beaver Creek, but I don't go near Site 14 anymore. Not after dark. Not even in daylight, unless I absolutely have to. That part of the forest, it's different. The air feels heavier. The birds, they don't sing. You get the sense that something's watching. And not just from a distance. Close. Hidden. Intelligent. I've spoken to other rangers off the record. Quiet talks. Away from the radios and admin offices. One told me about a camper who vanished in 2009. Left his shoes, pack, everything behind. The only trace they found was a pile of stacked rocks in a spiral and 3 wooden poles jammed into the creek bed in a triangle. Another swore he saw a shape up in the trees, 20 feet high, swinging silently through the canopy. Said it looked like a cross between a gorilla and a corpse. He quit a week later. No one wants to say the word, but we all think it. Bigfoot. But not the cuddly cartoon version. Not the blurry, harmless legend. This thing, it's a predator. It doesn't want to be filmed. It doesn't want attention. It wants solitude. Territory. And if you violate that, it will let you know. Sometimes with knocks, sometimes with screams, and sometimes it just takes someone. Jason never came back to Beaver Creek. I doubt he ever will. The last time I heard from one of the other campers, they said he was living off-grid in New Mexico. He doesn't talk about what happened. Doesn't even say the word woods. As for me, I stay quiet. I follow the rules. I still get the dreams. Trees closing in, the feeling of breath on my neck, the sound of branches snapping just behind me. Sometimes I still hear the knocks. And every time I do, I sit very still. And I don't knock back. Because whatever lives out there in the pines of Beaver Creek, it remembers me. And it's still watching. It waits in the granite. My name is Ethan Rourke, and I've been with the National Park Service for nearly 20 years. 12 of those years have been spent at Yosemite, a place that feels more cathedral than forest. Granite domes, towering redwoods, the endless churn of waterfalls. It's beautiful. It's unforgiving. And it's hiding something. Most visitors never see it. They stay on the trails, take their photos, and leave. But deep in the backcountry, days from trailheads and cell towers, there are things you don't read about in brochures. This happened during the fire season of 2021, in a high elevation zone we call Cathedral Basin. It's remote. No woods, no campgrounds, just narrow switchbacks and glacial lakes. I was part of a 2-person patrol assigned to sweep the upper routes before snow closed the passes. My partner that week was Andrea Sloan. Sharp, calm, ex-military. The kind of ranger who could talk down a drunk camper or splint a compound fracture without blinking. We'd worked together before, no problems. That changed on day 3. We'd set up camp near Echo Peak. At night, it got cold fast. That brittle alpine kind of cold that settles in your teeth. I woke up just before dawn and found Andrea outside the tent, standing barefoot on the granite. She didn't look at me. "Did you hear it?" she whispered. I hadn't. "What was it?" I asked. She shook her head. "It was under us." That morning, we found something in the snow. Tracks. Huge. Deep. Not bear. Not human. Three-toed. Clawed. Whatever made them had passed 20 feet from our tent. Andrea took photos. We radioed it in. Got static. No surprise, really, that far out. We followed the tracks for maybe a mile. That led to a narrow granite chute and vanished near the edge of a small alpine lake. The snow there had melted in a perfect circle. No sun, no steam. Andrea didn't say a word, just stared at the water. Later that afternoon, the winds changed. The birds vanished. The woods felt hollow. That night, I woke up to a low, rhythmic thumping, like something heavy was pacing the edge of our camp. I grabbed my light, stepped out, and found nothing. Just silence and Andrea's boot prints circling the tent. She'd been walking in a tight loop, over and over. She didn't remember it in the morning. By day 5, she was unraveling. Wouldn't eat. Kept saying things that didn't sound right. That the wind echoed too long. That our footsteps came twice. I wanted to pull out, hike back to base. But that night, we saw it. It stood on the ridge above our camp. Tall, gaunt. Hunched forward like a starving deer, but moving with unnatural speed. Its head was too large. Limbs too long. Eyes like polished stone. When our lights hit it, it didn't run. It just turned, slowly, and disappeared behind the rocks. Andrea whispered, "It's been following us since we left the basin." We didn't sleep that night. The final day, we tried to leave, but the trail was wrong. Trees that didn't belong. Cliffs where there should be none, like the landscape itself had shifted. At one point, Andrea froze and pointed up a slope. "It's wearing my face," she said. I looked, and there, standing motionless, was a figure that looked exactly like her. Same clothes, same pack, same stance. I blinked, and whatever it was gone. We ran. I don't remember the last 2 hours, just snapping branches, blood in my mouth, and a noise like stone dragging over stone. I woke up at the ranger station 3 days later. A SAR team had found me alone near the eastern rim. Dehydrated, frostbitten, talking nonsense. Andrea was never found. They told the media she fell or something. A tragic accident. But I know better. I've seen the satellite photos. The prints. The melted lake. And sometimes, late at night, I hear that dragging sound in my head again. That deep thumping from beneath the stone. Whatever it is, it's still out there. And it waits in the granite. The Lights Beyond Talon Ridge. I've worked as a ranger for over 20 years, mostly in Washington and Oregon, and nothing ever prepared me for what I witnessed at Talon Ridge. That stretch of wilderness doesn't show up on most maps. It's federally managed, but it's not marked as a national park or forest, classified as a wilderness preserve. Locals know it, though. They talk about it with the same tone they reserve for sinkholes and mine collapses, stuff you just don't mess with. We had a name for the area, past the cutoff trail at mile marker 12, the Ridge. Just the Ridge. It was where signals died, compasses spun, and the trees looked older somehow. The deeper you went, the quieter it got. Like sound didn't want to follow you in. The first time I stepped foot in there was because of a missing hiker. His name was Calvin Hennessy. 32, experienced backwoods camper, and an army vet. He'd registered a solo hike for 5 days and never checked back in. We found his car at the head of the disused old fire trail that cuts up along the east side of Talon Creek. It's technically outside the boundary, but the gate had been vandalized. Again. I was paired with Ranger Simmons, a younger guy, new to the region, but solid. We packed light, but enough for 3 nights if needed. The forest was thick. Moss grew in beards off the trees. By mile 6, Simmons noted how cold it had gotten. I checked my watch, 3:42 p.m., and it was reading 48 degrees Fahrenheit. That wasn't too odd for the region, but the drop was fast. Unnaturally fast. We found Cavan's trail by nightfall. Boot prints, scattered gear, a busted thermos. No signs of struggle, no blood, just abandoned in a hurry. Then we saw the lights, about 150 yards north, flickering through the treetops, blue and white, shimmering like reflections off water, except there was no water near us. Simmons radioed it in. Static. I tried mine. Nothing. We moved closer, thinking it was a campfire or someone with a lantern. But the light vanished as soon as we got within range. That first night, we camped in a clearing. The air was still, but something felt off, like we were being watched. Around 2 a.m., Simmons woke up. "Did you hear that?" I hadn't, but the look on his face made me reach for my flashlight. "Voices," he whispered. But they weren't speaking English. Hell, I'm not even sure they were speaking. The second day, the terrain changed. The trees thinned, but the underbrush thickened, with this red vine I'd never seen before. Like barbed kudzu. I don't know what kudzu is. It left welts if you brushed the bare skin. Then we found Calvin's pack. Empty. Torn. But not by an animal. It looked melted at the seams, like it had been exposed to high heat or acid. Simmons took photos. We marked the location and pressed on. That's when we heard the humming. Not like a machine, more like a resonance in your chest. We stopped. I could see my breath. Simmons fell to his knees, holding his ears. "I can't think," he shouted. "It's too loud." But to me, it was barely a whisper. We set up camp early that night. I gave Simmons a sedative from the med kit and sat watch. Around 1 a.m., the lights returned. Closer this time, dancing just beyond the ridgeline. I could see shadows moving beneath them. Tall figures, thin, elongated, not human. I woke Simmons. He was dazed but coherent. "We need to go," I said. We hiked out at first light, but the forest wasn't the same. The trails had shifted. I swear by everything I know, the topography had changed overnight. Landmarks were wrong. My GPS spun like a roulette wheel. We spent 2 more days circling the ridge, completely lost. Food ran low. We drank from our filtered bottles sparingly. Simmons grew quiet, staring off into the trees. He said, "They're behind the sky," more than once. I still don't know what he meant. On the 4th night, he vanished. No signs of struggle, no blood, no noise, just gone. I fired 3 shots in the air. Nothing. I called out until my voice cracked. Nothing. I stayed there, shouting and listening for hours. And then I saw him. Across the ridge, illuminated by those flickering lights. Simmons, standing perfectly still, arms at his sides, facing me. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Then he just rose. Upward. Smooth. Like gravity let go. I turned and ran. I don't remember the next 24 hours clearly. I woke up in a ravine with a broken ankle and my radio sputtering. A chopper picked me up 2 days later. They said I'd been missing for 11 days. They never found Simmons or Calvin. The report says disorientation due to exposure, likely trauma-induced hallucinations. But that's not what happened. Something in those woods, watching, changing the land, pulling people in. I've transferred since then. I won't go near Talon Ridge again. But I file the sightings. I still get reports. Lights, missing hikers, strange sounds, electromagnetic interference, you name it. If you ever find yourself near Talon Ridge and you see blue lights dancing through the trees, don't follow them. Whatever's out there, it doesn't want to be understood. It just wants you to come closer. My name is Caleb Rusk, and I've worked as a ranger at Salt Fork State Park for 8 years. It's the biggest state park in Ohio, 17,000 acres of thick hardwoods, winding trails, and pockets of dense wilderness you could hike into and never come back out of. Most people know it for fishing, boating, the lodge, maybe the old folklore, but if you've ever worked the back trails, the ones that don't show up on most maps, you know there's something else out there. Something old. Something territorial. The first time I felt it breathing down my neck was after a solo camper went missing. His name was Jordan Klein. Mid-30s, according to his registration form, he'd been to Salt Lake Fork 5 times before. Always off-grid. Primitive camping, no cell service, sometimes for days at a time. That didn't concern us. What did was the fact that he checked in on a Tuesday morning, said he was headed toward a remote spur trail near Morgan's Knob, and no one saw him again. By Saturday evening, his truck was still in the parking lot. I was sent to check it out. Typical wellness protocol. 9 times out of 10, it's a flat tire, a long hike, or some guy chasing mushrooms and forgetting the time. But when I hiked out towards Morgan's Knob that Sunday morning, I knew this wasn't going to be one of those 9. The first red flag? No fire ring. No campsite left behind at all. At least not at first glance. I followed the ridge trail for about 2 hours, then cut down into a gully with an old game path running through it. That's when I saw the shredded tarp. It was hanging from a maple tree, about 12 feet up, tangled and torn like something had thrown it up there. I found the rest of the campsite 10 yards away. What was left of it, anyway. The tent had been crushed. Not slashed, not cut, flattened, like a boulder had been dropped on it. One of the metal poles was snapped in half, the other twisted. A camping stove lay 30 feet away, like it had been thrown. I saw drag marks leading from the tent toward the tree line. They stopped at a cluster of mossy rocks, then disappeared. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, just silence. I backed off and radioed base. Timmons, this is Rusk. Found the site. It's bad. No sign of the camper, but the tent's totaled. Drag marks, something's off. The reply crackled back. Copy that. Sit tight. We'll send in a second unit. I didn't wait. Something about the woods there felt off. Heavier, like the trees were pressing in. I've worked in Salt Fork long enough to recognize normal forest silence, and this wasn't it. There weren't any birds. No bugs. Not even wind. It felt like something was watching me. And that's when I found the footprint. Size 16 or more. Bare. Human-shaped, but with a width like a cinder block. Sunk deep into the gravel by the gully, as if whatever made it weighed upwards of 500 pounds. I took pictures, measured it with my boot. That night, I didn't sleep, because I knew Jordan Klein didn't just get lost out there. He was taken. The next morning, we organized a search. 2 rangers, 1 deputy from the county sheriff's office, and 3 volunteers from a local hiking group. We kept it tight. No big press releases, no panic. Just a routine search for a missing camper. That's how the park likes to handle things like this. Quiet, controlled. We started from the ruined tent and fanned out in 3 directions. I took the eastern sweep with a guy named Mike, a volunteer, former military, sharp eyes. About 1.5 miles in, the trail vanished into thick undergrowth. We were bushwhacking at that point, compass and gut instinct only. That's when we found the bones. They were laid out in a line, maybe 40 feet long, across a narrow ridge. Alternating deer skulls, raccoon pelvises, even a few femurs from something larger. All bleached, clean, and stacked in pairs. Not buried, not scattered like natural predation, arranged. Jesus, Mike muttered, staring down. What the hell does this? I crouched next to a skull. There were scratches on it. Deliberate carvings. Not from teeth. From stone tools or claws. This isn't a kill site, I said. It's a warning. Mike raised his binoculars and scanned the trees. We're not alone out here. He was right. The dog handler's voice crackled over the radio. Be advised, our canine is refusing to go further. Ears down, tail tucked. Won't cross the ravine to the west. I knew the spot. Locals called it Devil's Hollow. Unofficially, of course. Deep cut ravine, full of dense laurel and twisted oaks. Hard to navigate, even in daylight. We regrouped at the ridge and made camp for the night. I didn't want to push any further with light fading. At around 2 a.m., I heard the first tree break. It didn't fall, it snapped, loud and close, like someone had grabbed it with both hands and twisted. Then came the drumming, rhythmic, like fists pounding on a hollow trunk. Mike sat bolt upright, hand on his sidearm. That's not a bear. Something moved just past the tree line. Heavy footfalls, slow and deliberate. We all froze. The deputy tried to radio out, but got nothing but static. Then the rocks started. Not pebbles, fist-sized stones, hurled into camp from the darkness. One smashed into our supply crate. Another hit a tree above my head, showering me with bark. "Everyone down," I barked. Flashlights clicked on, sweeping wildly. Nothing. Just broken branches and the echo of whatever had just tested our nerves. Mike whispered, "This isn't random. It's testing us." I knew then what we were dealing with. Not an animal, a guardian, and we were in its territory. We didn't sleep that night. Not really. We took turns on watch, but no one truly closed their eyes. The woods had gone dead silent again. That eerie, oppressive stillness you don't forget once you've experienced it. Even the crickets were gone. By dawn, one of the volunteers, Paul, a biology teacher from Cambridge, was missing. His gear was gone. Pack, canteen, even his sleeping bag, but there were no footprints leading out of camp. No broken brush, just an empty spot where he'd been sleeping. We split up fast, Mike and I taking the southern slope, while the deputy and the dog handler swept north. We found Paul half a mile downslope, 40 feet up a pine tree. He was wedged into a crook between two branches, curled into a fetal position. Alive, but barely responsive. I climbed up, speaking his name, trying not to spook him. He just kept whispering, "It knows. It knows." It didn't want me there. We got him down with ropes and sedated him before evacuation. That's when I made the decision. I was going in deeper. We were just on the edge of something's range. I needed to know how far it went. The next day, Mike and I packed light. No volunteers this time, and hiked another 2 miles past Devil's Hollow. That's where we found the clearing. It wasn't natural. The trees had been bent. Not chopped, bent into arches and woven into crude lattice shapes. Some were stacked into lean-tos. Others formed massive nest-like structures, big enough for a man to crawl into. But the air inside that clearing, it was heavy, like the pressure dropped. I had a ringing in my ears and a nausea that I couldn't shake. And then we found the boots. 2 brown leather, neatly placed side by side near a pile of twigs and moss. Just beyond them, laid out carefully, were dozens of small wooden figures, rough carvings, humanoid shapes with long arms and distorted faces, all staring at the center of the clearing. Mike took a step forward. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Deep. Just behind me. I turned fast. Light up. Shotgun raised. Nothing. But the air shifted, like something huge had just moved past us. Then the drone above us, a small recon quad we'd launched, cut out. We reviewed the footage later. It showed a large shadow, easily 9 feet tall, stepping between the trees. The branches bowed as it passed. Then static. We hiked back in silence, every sense on high alert, because we weren't just trespassing, we were being studied. We hiked out with the drone footage and a renewed sense of urgency. I compiled everything: photos, tracks, video clips, even sketches of the tree structures, and submitted a full report to the district office. 3 days later, it was flagged, inconclusive, and then archived. I wasn't surprised, but what did surprise me was the man who showed up in my office the next day. Drove in from Columbus. Badge didn't say Fish and Wildlife, just State Environmental Oversight. He closed the door, sat across from me, and said, "We saw the footage. You're lucky." I stared at him. "Lucky?" "Yeah," he said, "because you didn't see it clearly. If you had, you wouldn't be here, and we'd be writing a very different kind of report." He leaned forward. "This isn't new. We've been monitoring Salt Fork for over 30 years. We don't talk about it. We don't provoke it. And we don't name it." Then he slid a manila folder across my desk. Inside, grainy photos from the 90s. Tree structures. Mangled tents. One blurry frame of something massive walking upright through the trees. "Don't go back in Morgan's Knob," he said. "Don't take anyone else out there. And for God's sake, don't try to document it again." He left without another word. A week later, the trail past Devil's Hollow was marked, closed due to erosion. Unofficially, it was off limits. But I wasn't done. That fall, I returned alone. I needed closure. I wanted answers. I made it to the clearing again, just before dusk. The structures were still there, but more had been added. New arches, larger nests. The wood figures had multiplied. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Some looked newer. And then I saw it. The creature. 10 feet tall, covered in dark matted hair. Arms like oak limbs. Shoulders wide enough to block out the sun. It didn't roar. Didn't growl. It just watched me. Silent. Measured. Then it stepped back, vanishing into the trees like it was never there. I stood frozen. My breath caught. I didn't move until the last rays of sun faded. Then I ran. I left Salt Fork 3 months later. I didn't tell anyone the full story. Not my coworkers, not my supervisor, not even my family. Because what I saw wasn't meant to be seen. Whatever it is that lives past Morgan's Knob, it doesn't want attention. It wants territory. And if you cross into it, it lets you go. Not out of mercy, but as a message. Stay out. A few months ago, long after I'd taken a job in Hocking Hills, I got a package. No return address, just brown paper and tape. Inside were 2 things. The first one was one of those carved wooden figures. Arms too long, hollow eyes, same as the ones in the clearing. The second was a photo. A printed photo. grainy and dark, but clear enough. It was me, asleep in my tent, taken from just outside the fabric, and scrawled across the bottom in crooked, handwritten letters. Still watching. I never went back to Salt Fork, and I never will. The Weeping Woman of Chiricahua. Chiricahua National Monument. And I apologize if I just totally butchered Chiricahua. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly, or at least close enough. They say the desert doesn't forget. The wind, the rocks, the bones, they all hold memory the way a canyon echoes back a scream. I didn't believe that until I met her. I've been a ranger in Arizona for 15 years. Most of them here at Chiricahua. I was raised just outside Wilcox. My grandfather was Mescalero Apache. He taught me to read the land before I could read a map. Taught me when not to speak, when to listen instead. That's how I first knew something was wrong. Not from what I heard, but from what I didn't. It started with a storm. One of those freak desert downpours that rolls in like it has a grudge. Lightning, flooding, whole washes turned to rivers. It blew through in under an hour, but it left behind something more than broken trails and fallen limbs. It left her. First sighting came from a couple camped along Bonita Creek. Said they heard a woman crying in the dark. Not the usual coyote whimper or wind through rock. This was closer. Human. Low and long. The man stepped out to investigate. He never came back. His wife was found the next day, wandering barefoot, eyes wide. No memory of how she got back to the visitor center. That was the first report. The second came from a trail crew. They found a doll, old, hand-stitched, with hair made of twisted black thread, lying in the middle of Sarah Deming Trail. No one claimed it. They left it alone. Next day, one of the crew didn't show up for roll call. I was sent to check the site. Found his boots, laced and upright, just like someone had stepped right out of them. Same thing we found when the tourist vanished last fall. That night, I stayed behind to patrol, alone. At dusk, I set up camp near Echo Canyon. The wind carried dust, the kind that stings your eyes and tastes like old iron. I watched the shadows stretch long across the hoodoos. Then I heard it, crying. Not far, not muffled, like someone was sitting just beyond the firelight. I called out, "You need help? Ranger Boone here." No response, just more sobbing. I stood, flashlight raised, and walked toward the sound. It led me to a ravine I'd walked 100 times before, but tonight, it was different. Rocks felt wrong under my boots, softer, unsteady. Then I saw her. White dress, thin, filthy like it had been buried. Hair long, tangled, black as obsidian. She was kneeling in the sand, shoulders shaking. I reached for my radio. Static. When I looked back up, she was standing. Her face was blurred, Not from the distance, from the air around it. Like heat haze, but wrong. It twisted too much. Her arms dangled long at her sides, and where her hands should have been, there was nothing. Just dripping black holes. She screamed, not with a mouth, with everything. The canyon screamed with her. Rocks shuddered. My ears rang. Blood ran from my nose. I turned and ran. The trail behind me was gone. No prints, no signs, just endless dark stone, and that crying. Closer now, inside my head. I tripped, fell, hit my head on a stone. I was out cold. When I woke, it was morning. The sun was up, and birds were chirping. I was back on the trail, but something followed me back. Now, some nights, I hear weeping across the ranger station. I locked every door, every window, but I still wake to find water pooling at the foot of my bed. Desert water. Impossible water. They say she's La Llorona, but I think that's just the name we gave her. She's older. She's a curse left behind by something we buried in this land and never apologized to. She doesn't want forgiveness. She wants company. I've worked as a backcountry ranger for over 16 years. Most of them covering the eastern slopes around Mossy Fork. It's a part of West Virginia few people hike anymore. Steep, wild, unpredictable. There's no cell signal. You rely on radios and gut instinct. And if you twist an ankle out there, it might be days before help arrives. That's how long it took us to find the surveyor. His name was Peter Elwell. Mid-30s, contractor for a pipeline proposal. He'd ignored the uncharted zone markers and gone off course to cut time through a steep basin below Mossy Fork. When his team lost contact, they waited 36 hours before alerting the park. I was dispatched with a seasoned search tech named Carla. She was quiet, focused, and didn't scare easy. But that place got to her. The basin was strange from the start. Dry. Bone dry. No leaf moisture, no dew, not even puddles and shaded pockets. We found signs of Peter's descent. Crushed brush, GPS flag tape, broken branches, and drag marks. Long, deep ones. After 8 hours of grid search, we heard tapping. 3 knocks. Rhythmic. Hollow like wood on stone. Coming from below. That's when we discovered the dry house. It wasn't a natural formation. Carved steps led down into the hillside, hidden behind a moss-covered outcrop. The entrance was narrow, almost ceremonial, with markings etched into the stone. Symbols that resembled ancient runes, or maybe Appalachian cipher glyphs. No animal sign, no insects, just dry air and silence. We went in against protocol. The interior wasn't wet, but it felt wrong. The walls were smooth, carved, the ceiling low. Bones were embedded into the mortar. Small, long, human-like. At the end of the passage was a chamber, circular, maybe 15 feet wide. Peter was there, alive. Naked, shaking, eyes wide and glazed. He didn't blink, didn't seem to recognize us. He was staring at the far wall where a shape was pressed into the stone, like something large had once been there, curled into a fetal position. The imprint had digits, limbs, a long, narrow head. Carla tried to speak to him, but Peter just whispered, "It's dry because it took all the water with it." We got him out. It took hours. He screamed once we hit sunlight. Just a raw, primal wail. He never spoke again. That night, I returned alone. I had to know. The dry house was gone. I mean, gone. The hillside had collapsed. Or maybe never existed. Just raw earth and tree roots where the steps had been. No chamber, no bones, no runes. I filed the report under geological anomaly and heat exhaustion. Peter was institutionalized. But Carla called me 2 months later. She couldn't sleep. Said she kept dreaming of dry hands wrapping around her ankles while she lay in bed. Said she found the same runes drawn in dust on her kitchen floor. She moved to Montana. No forwarding address. I still patrol Mossy Fork. Still carry that field sketch of the runes in my journal. Sometimes I feel the air shift and I think I hear that tapping again. If you find a doorway in the woods, perfectly dry, while everything around it is soaked, don't go in. Whatever lived there still thirsts. Chestnut Ridge stretches for miles through north-central West Virginia, a long vein of old hills, jagged stone, and weather-warped trees. I've hiked it end to end more times than I can count. Plenty of legends circle the place. Ghost dogs, spook lights, even Civil War deserters who supposedly became feral cannibals. All nonsense. But the singing is real. It started last October. A group of through hikers came into the ranger station, shaken up. Said they heard a choir deep in the woods the night before. Not birds, not people, voices. Harmonizing. Described it as beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Their eyes said more than their mouths did. I figured it was wind, maybe owls, until the reports kept coming in. Different hikers, different campsites, always the same story. A sound like dozens of human voices singing in perfect harmony somewhere out in the trees. No instruments, no lyrics, just tone and terror. We sent a trail crew to investigate. They didn't hear anything. But 2 weeks later, one of the crew members quit without notice. Left all his gear behind. When I called, he answered and said, "I can still hear it." That's when I decided I was going to go in myself. I camped on a remote saddle on the north side of the ridge. Brought audio equipment, trail cams, and a thermal scope. It was dead quiet all day. I started thinking I'd finally fallen for ranger superstition. Then the sun went down. At 2:04 a.m., I heard it. A single note, faint, far. Then another, layered, rising. Dozens of voices, male, female, childlike, bass, soprano, blended together in a song I couldn't place but felt deep in my spine. The sound moved through the trees, not echoing, not bouncing, but floating. I stood up. My skin prickled. The notes grew louder, harmonies converging into something too precise to be natural. And then I saw them. Red lights. Dozens of them. Maybe more. Each light moved independently, like fireflies, but brighter, pulsing in sync with the music. They came down the ridge, slow, silent, hovering. My trail cam lit up, recording nothing but static. The thermal scope died. One of the lights floated right in front of me. It didn't cast heat, didn't reflect in my lens, but I felt it, like standing near a speaker playing music too low to hear, but strong enough to vibrate your bones. I whispered, "What are you?" The lights flared, and the choir stopped. Silence, utter and absolute. Then came a scream. Not mine, not human. A raw, fractured noise that hit me like a wave. I collapsed. I woke at dawn, curled on my side, frost clinging to my jacket. The recorder had captured nothing but white noise. My camp had been disturbed, no damage, just rearranged. Pack on the other side of the fire, boots facing west. Tent zipper opened halfway. I hiked out and filed an unofficial report. Since then, more people have claimed to hear the choir. Some say it's angels, others say it's something else. Whatever it is, the lights always precede it. And if you ever hear the red choir while out on Chestnut Ridge, don't speak, don't respond, because once you do, the song changes, and it starts to sing for you. Lost Elk Ravine wasn't on any public trail list, for good reason. The terrain was unstable, the animal activity unpredictable, and the nearest ranger station was nearly 30 miles away. It's one of those tucked away corners of Monongahela that feels untouched, because it is. They told me not to patrol there alone. They didn't have to tell me twice, until the day they did. A pair of backpackers went missing after making an unpermitted side trip into the ravine. Last contact was a blurry satellite message. Saw a man, looks like a ranger, followed by coordinates deep in the off-limits zone. No name, no follow-up, no return. By the time we organized a sweep, most of the team had been reassigned or stuck on fire watch, so I went in with a reserve deputy named Ellis. Tough guy, ex-Air Force, first time in the mountains. We started at dawn. The ravine was mist-soaked and dense with birch and spruce. The deeper we went, the quieter everything got. Not silent, just wrong. The kind of quiet where your own heartbeat feels too loud. By early afternoon, we found the backpackers' trail. Fresh. Boot prints. Signs of camping. A fire ring, still cold. But something was off at the site. It looked arranged. Deliberately disturbed. Like someone had pretended to make a hasty exit. Ellis picked up something from the fire pit. Half-burned paper. He turned it over, and we both froze. It was a park safety pamphlet, featuring my face. I'd never met these hikers, never handed them anything. Then we heard it. "Hey, over there." My voice, clear, confident, just ahead. I instinctively shouted back, but Ellis grabbed my arm. "That's not you," he whispered. We crept forward. Just beyond the rise, we saw a man in a ranger uniform. My uniform. My name tag. Standing with his back to us. He turned, and it was me. Same face. Same beard. Same scar above the left eyebrow. But his smile was wrong. Too wide. Lips a little too red. And his eyes, they blinked sideways. Ellis raised his sidearm. The thing grinned wider and stepped back into the fog, vanishing behind a deadfall tree. We didn't chase it. We backed out. Took a longer loop around the ridge. When we made camp that night, we heard it again. My voice, calling for help. Sometimes from the north, sometimes from behind us. Ellis didn't sleep. The second day, we found the hikers. What was left of them, anyway. Their faces had been removed. Not mauled, removed. Peeled clean like someone had tried to wear them. Their gear was arranged neatly beside the bodies, like a child tidying up after dress-up. Ellis vomited. We hiked out of there fast. The thing followed us. Sometimes glimpsed between trees, sometimes not, but always mimicking. Sometimes me, sometimes Ellis. Sometimes both of us at once. The report says we found a bear attack site and a false trail. But I keep that half-burnt pamphlet locked in my desk. And sometimes, on the wind, I still hear my voice calling from the trees. If you're ever lost near Lost Elk Ravine, and you hear someone who sounds like you, don't answer. It only needs your voice once. Maplejaw Gorge is a scar in the forest. That's the only way I can describe it. A steep, twisted ravine with jagged walls and slippery stone, overgrown with black moss and choked by trees older than anything else in the park. There are no formal trails through it anymore. Too dangerous, too unstable. The official line is landslide risk. But the real reason is the lights. I first heard about them from a retired miner named Glenn, who used to work the coal shafts near the base of the gorge back in the 70s. He came into the ranger station one fall evening, smelled like whiskey and tobacco, and said, "The lights are back." I didn't know what he meant. He told me stories of lanterns bobbing through the trees after sundown, floating where no person could walk. Said they screamed if you got too close. Said a whole shift of workers once disappeared in a single night after trying to follow them. I chalked it up to old stories and bourbon. Until last spring, when we got a 911 ping from a pair of spelunkers exploring a dry runoff shaft that connects near the gorge's lip. Their message was garbled, but one thing was clear. Lights, screaming, can't find our way out. Those are the words we heard. They were experienced, knew better than to panic. Something was wrong. I volunteered to search with my partner Lynn, a tough ranger with a calm head and a dry sense of humor. We descended into Maplejaw Gorge just after dawn, with rope, radio, and thermal gear. The deeper we went, the less the forest felt alive. Trees leaned unnaturally, some grown sideways, others spiraling. The gorge didn't echo sound, it swallowed it. An hour in, we found one of the spelunker's bags torn open beside a creek. Nothing taken, just shredded, as if slashed by dozens of tiny blades. A trail of boot prints led into a cluster of boulders at the base of a deadfall. Then we saw the first lantern, a soft orange glow, maybe 30 feet away, bobbing gently above the rocks. No one was holding it. It hovered mid-air, swaying like it was being carried. Maybe a reflection, Lynn muttered, but I could hear it. A faint hum, like singing, wordless, droning. Then it screamed, a sharp, shrill, inhuman shriek that made every bird in the gorge scatter at once. The light flared and vanished. We stood frozen. Then we saw 3 more. One to the left, one above us on a ridge, and one right behind where the first had vanished. They didn't move like lanterns. They drifted like predators. We followed them against our better judgment, searching for the missing hikers until we found the shaft. A collapsed mine opening, partially unearthed by erosion. Air flowed out, cold and dry. There were scratch marks on the rocks, deep, erratic. And burned into the rock above the shaft was a shape. A human figure, upside down, mouth wide open. We descended. The air grew colder. The walls glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the humming. The deeper we went, the more the rock looked wrong, not natural, melded almost. At the end of the shaft, we found them, or what was left. 2 bodies fused together by their faces, not crushed, not decomposed, melded, as if their skulls had been softened and pressed together like clay. Their hands were clutching something, an old-style lantern, blackened and cracked. It was warm. We hauled out of there fast. Lynn refused to speak the entire way. When we reached the surface, we looked back. Dozens of lanterns had appeared across the gorge, lining the cliffs, drifting between trees. They didn't scream this time. They just watched. Lynn put in for reassignment the next day. I stayed behind. I've gone back twice since. Once in fall, once in spring. And every time, the lanterns are there. If you see one, don't follow it. Don't let the song lure you in. Because if it screams and you're too close, it takes your shape and leaves your scream behind. Rakebone Trail isn't a trail anymore. Back in the 1930s, it was a hunting path cut through a high ridge above Laurel Hollow. Back when that part of West Virginia was all logging and moonshine. The trail was narrow, dangerous, and often washed out. It was decommissioned by the 60s. Most rangers don't even know it exists. But I do. I was stationed out of Marlington when I first heard the name. An old prospector came into the ranger station, pale as milk and trembling. Said he'd seen the man with the weeping eyes standing in the middle of the old trail. Said he just stood there, crying, not moving. The prospector never went back. I figured it was a moonshine-fueled hallucination, or maybe even dementia, until I saw him. It was late March, still patches of snow in the shadows. A call came in about illegal trapping in an off-map quadrant. I was the closest on rotation. They gave me coordinates, right along Rakebone's old cut. I hiked out early. Dense fog clung to the ridgeline like wet cotton. The woods were quiet, too quiet. I could hear my own bootfalls echoing. And then I saw him, standing about 50 yards up the trail, still as stone, wearing old overalls and no shirt. Pale skin, long arms, and his face. His eyes were black pits, and tears poured from them. Not blood, not water, something thick, mucus-like. It streamed down his cheeks and vanished into his chest. He didn't move. I called out. He didn't blink. I raised my radio to call it in, and he screamed. It wasn't a sound, it was pressure, like a storm hitting your eardrums all at once. My nose bled instantly. The trees bent away from him, and then he vanished. No fade, no run, just gone, like a film cut. I collapsed, vision blurry, blood dripping from my ears. When I came to, the woods were still, birds chirping, sun peeking through. I thought maybe it was a seizure, a stroke. I didn't report it, but a week later, a hunter was found dead near the same ridge line. No wounds, no sign of struggle, but his face was soaked like he'd been crying for hours. His eyes were red and ruptured, and carved into a tree nearby, a set of deep gouges in the shape of two vertical slashes, almost like weeping eyes. They say he appears to the grieving, to the guilt-ridden, that he latches onto sorrow and amplifies it until your own mind breaks. No one knows where he came from. Some say he was a mourning father, cursed by grief. Others say he was never human. I've heard the cries again, in the distance, on foggy mornings when I'm alone on the ridgeline. I don't go near Rakebone anymore. If you're ever out there and you see a pale man crying in the woods, don't get close. He's not weeping for you. He's weeping through you. You ever hear of a place called Blackroot Sink? Didn't think so. I've been with the National Park Service for almost 15 years, stationed out here in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. And even I didn't know it existed until about 5 years ago, when an old ranger named Deke handed me a hand-drawn map and said, "Don't ever go past the boundary tree." Deke was retiring that week. This was his parting gift. A map with a red X marked deep in the southern basin near a spot he called the Sink. He wouldn't explain, just said, "Some places are closed for a reason. That ain't our forest down there." I chalked it up to backwoods superstition. This job's full of it. Rangers swap stories like old campfire myths. Wild men, witches, ghost lights, you name it. But something about Deke's tone stuck with me. 3 years later, I got the call. A small group of college kids had gone off grid on a self styled survivalist retreat. No permits, no contact in over 10 days. One of their GPS check ins pinged not far from the southern basin, damn close to where Deke's map said not to go. I was sent in with a young ranger named Tobias. Green, eager, didn't believe in anything he couldn't Google. We had 5 days of rations, radios, and enough experience between us to handle most situations. The forest was off that week. No bird song. The trees leaned oddly, like they were listening. Around dusk, we found their campsite. Tent poles snapped, gear scattered. No blood, but no people either. A makeshift journal was left in a sealed bag under a rock, labeled Day 4. We saw the roots move. Tobias laughed. Probably shrooms or meth, he said. But I remembered Deke's last words. This wasn't our forest anymore. We made camp but took shifts on watch. Just after 3 a.m., something circled the site. Too big for a coyote, too smooth for a bear. The movement wasn't crashing, it was gliding. I flashed my light and caught sight of something just outside the trees. Tall, like a man. But the legs were wrong. They bent backwards like a horse's, and its skin glistened like bark soaked in oil. It vanished when the light hit it. Tobias didn't see it, but he believed me after sunrise when we found prints. Not boot prints, cloven. We followed the trail further south. By the second day, the ground changed. Black moss coated everything. The trees were hollowed out in spirals, like something twisted its way through. That night, Tobias woke me up in a panic. They were talking outside the tent. I swear to God, I heard them, like they were underground. The next morning, his boots were missing. Not stolen, just gone, like they were never there. We hiked barefoot a few hours, until we found a half-buried fire pit, half-finished clay sculptures surrounding it, human forms with trees growing out of their heads. We didn't speak for a long time after that. Around midday, on the 4th day, we hit the heart of the sink. A depression in the forest floor made 100 feet wide, rimmed with gnarled black trees, their roots reaching in like claws. And at the center, a hole, perfectly round, maybe 5 feet wide, black as pitch. No bottom. The air around it buzzed with static, and I swear to you, it pulled at my mind. Tobias walked right toward it. Didn't say a word, just stepped in. I lunged and caught his pack at the last second. He thrashed, screamed, "It's calling me," and clawed at my hands like a man possessed. I dragged him back, and he passed out cold. We camped one final night and hiked out the next morning, half mad with exhaustion. When the search team picked us up, they said we'd been gone 9 days. Our gear was covered in sap, thick, black, and cold to the touch. Tobias left the service 2 months later. Never told his side. I kept Deke's map, though. Added a new mark to it, another red X. Don't go to Blackroot Sink. Some things down there still remember being men, and some never were. In the far northern end of the preserve, near the forgotten boundary between Parkland and Old Coal Country, there's a ghost town called Almer's Bend. It doesn't show up on any visitors' brochures. You won't even find it on the map. It's all moss choked buildings, broken timber, and rusted tools left where they fell. I was sent down there for a routine safety sweep. Decrepit structures, potential sinkholes, hazard signage, that sort of thing. They wanted to fence it off and finally make it off limits. It was a 1 day job. I stayed 3. The town had been abandoned since the 1940s after a string of mining collapses and a bizarre case where a preacher and his entire congregation reportedly vanished during a Sunday service. Just gone. Pews overturned, doors still locked from the inside. No bodies were ever found. I set up camp just outside the old schoolhouse and began inspecting the structures, one by one. Everything was what you'd expect: collapsed roofs, scorched wallpaper, busted floorboards. Until I found the cellar. It was behind the postmaster's house, covered in ivy and half buried under a rotting rain barrel. A small iron gate over a narrow stairwell. It wasn't on the original site plans. I had to pry the grate loose with a shovel just to peek inside. And that's when I saw him. Down at the bottom of the stone steps, just beyond where the light reached, stood a man, perfectly still, perfectly silent. I couldn't make out his face, but I knew he was staring at me. He didn't say a word, didn't blink, didn't move, just stood there, hands at his sides, as if he'd been waiting a long time. I called out. No answer. I radioed for backup. Just static. I backed away, but curiosity got the better of me. I returned the next day with a heavier flashlight and backup batteries. The cellar was empty. The stairs led down into a single stone room. No furniture, no tools, just a single long scrape made across the floor, as if something had been dragged in or out. I left immediately. That night, I heard breathing outside my tent. Not animal, not wind, just slow, heavy breathing. When I stepped out, everything was still. Until I looked back at the schoolhouse. He was standing in the bell tower. Same man, same posture. Too tall, too still. I shined my light. He was gone. The next morning, every structure I'd marked for demolition had been unmarked. My flagging tape was gone, replaced with red twine, tied in precise symmetrical loops. That was enough for me. I packed up, hiked out, and filed my report under extreme structural decay. Immediate closure recommended. The park approved fencing off the entire area within the week. But I didn't tell them everything. I didn't tell them I kept seeing the man in my trail cam photos. Never in the frame, just reflections. Windows. Water. My own sunglasses. And I didn't tell them what I found in my final image on my phone the morning I left. A shot of the cellar. And pressed against the inside of the grate, a face. Close. Distorted. Smiling. If you ever find yourself near Almer's Bend and you see a structure with a barrel opening in the ground, don't look inside. He's still down there, waiting for you to open the door again. There's a stretch of cliff line along the Greenbrier River called Laurel Bluffs. Sheer drop offs, overgrown trails, and more than one warning sign posted by the Park Service in the last 30 years. Rock falls, unstable footing, thick vegetation. It's the kind of place you pass by and forget. But the locals never did. They always said, don't go walking when the dogs are howling. I thought that was just a backwoods saying until last spring when a group of amateur botanists got separated near the bluffs. They were documenting wildflowers along an old trail that used to lead to an overlook. They radioed in that they'd heard barking, lots of it, and were retreating back down the switchbacks. Then they went silent. 3 hours later, only two came stumbling out of the woods, shaken, covered in scratches, rambling about a pack of black dogs with no eyes that moved without sound and smelled like rust and fire. We mounted a full search. I was lead on foot, accompanied by Ranger Harrow, one of our field medics. We found nothing at first. No sign of the third botanist. No blood. No gear. But further up the bluffs, we did find tracks. Not dog tracks, more like hoof prints, large ones. Cloven. Deep. We kept going, thinking maybe we were tracking a wild boar or some kind of escaped livestock. But that night, our perimeter sensors started triggering in sequence. Motion alerts swept in a slow, organized arc, like something encircling us. That's when we heard the howls. Low, vibrating the ground, and not from a single direction. They came from below the bluff. I crawled to the edge, turned off my headlamp, and looked. I saw movement. Down below, far beneath the rock face, a shape circled along the tree line. Four-legged, but too long. And there were others, dozens, creeping up the bluff wall in total silence. I pulled Harrow back. We radioed the team. No signal. We moved east through the trees, trying to descend using an old hunting trail. That's when the air turned wrong. It was thick, electric, like being inside a storm before the lightning crashes. The woods felt narrower. The moon vanished behind fast-moving clouds, though the wind didn't move. We heard growling behind us, then ahead, then above. Shapes with glittering teeth darted between the trees. Never fully seen, only felt. And always, always, that howling. Deep, commanding. Harrow tripped and twisted her ankle. I had to drag her half a mile before we hit the lower fire road and got a signal. They found us at dawn. She was barely conscious. The medic said she had signs of exposure and extreme adrenal fatigue. When she came to, all she could say was, they weren't dogs. They wore dogs. Whatever's in those woods isn't a natural predator. It's something older, something that hunts for sport. We never found the missing botanist. The only thing recovered was a torn backpack, and inside, a scrap of hide that didn't match any known animal. Black, bristled, warm to the touch even after hours in cold storage. we shut down the bluff trail permanently. But if you're ever out past the Greenbrier and you hear the sound of dogs howling in the hills, don't follow it, because the hounds below Laurel Bluffs aren't calling to each other. They're calling you. Why did the Scarecrow win an award? Because he was outstanding in his field. OldDadGuy. You thought you were alone, didn't you? But they've been watching the whole time. Like, subscribe, and maybe they'll let you sleep tonight.